because building the ETL, if you're a data engineer right now and you're thinking about doing like freelancing or consulting, you can make a lot of really good money building ETLs for, small to mid-sized companies that aren't ready to hire a data engineering team, but need some dashboarding information now. It's a cool place to be in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Data Scientist Show. Today we have Avery Smith. Avery is a founder and data science coach at Data Career Jumpstart. He's also a data engineer at MIT Professional Education. Previously, he was working on data science consulting at Snow Data Science and optimization and predictive analytics at ExxonMobil. Today, we'll talk about his career journey from chemical engineer to data science, supply chain optimization, and data science consulting. He will also share his best advice for people who want to get into data science. If you've been enjoying the show, subscribe to the channel and give me a 5-star review. Welcome to the show, Avery.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you for having me on. I'm really excited.
Yeah, glad to have you here. So how did you get into data science?
It's a good question. I kind of stumbled into it on accident. I was working as like I was in college. I was an undergrad student, and I was working really as a lab technician. So I was in the lab. I was studying chemical engineering. I was working for this small company that only had about like 12 people on staff. But one of them was a data scientist. And so I was a lab technician, and there was a data scientist there. And I worked in the lab, running experiments and generating data that we'd hand off to our data scientist. And he would, do all this crazy algorithm stuff that I knew nothing about, and turn our experiments into something that made sense. Really cool guy, really liked learning from him. But he ended up leaving like after 3 months of me joining this small company. And we couldn't hire another data scientist. We couldn't find anyone. They were too expensive. They were too high in demand. We couldn't hire anyone else. And so after waiting like 3 more months to hire another data scientist, I was like, all right, well, how hard can this be? I'm just going to try it out on my own and see how it goes. So I started like researching and, figured out some algorithms. The algorithm that was of interest specifically to our company was PCA, so principal component analysis. So I did some research about that. Made a little script in MATLAB, actually, because I didn't know Python at the time. And I showed my boss and I said, hey, is this interesting? Is this kind of what the data scientist did? And he said, sure, that is pretty good, and keep working on it. And so basically I spent a little bit more time, a little less time in the lab and a little bit more time doing data. And eventually I just fell in love and I was hooked and never looked back. And it was awesome. I just really got into the data science thing after that.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that journey. Do you remember what was the first project you worked on as a data scientist?
Yeah, for sure. Well, okay. I guess it kind of depends if you count the project I did when I was, I wasn't a data scientist yet, but I was doing data science at this small company. And all I did, this is going to sound kind of juvenile, but everyone's got to start somewhere, was I basically read in a CSV, and I would find a certain it was change detection. So basically I did a little algorithm to detect change, and I would just mark at what second that change occurred, and take basically a snapshot of that second for the next 30 seconds and basically return some values off of that. So it was really just like data manipulation in what would have been pandas, but it was in MATLAB. So it seems maybe a little basic, but it was really important to us, and it automated that analysis process, which without a data scientist took us like 2 hours to do, which sounds like a long time because we were just engineers and we didn't know how to program. But it with one button click, it would do it in 10 seconds. So we were all really fascinated with the power of data science and automation.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So yeah, a lot of still today, doesn't matter what type of data scientist are you, a lot of our work is like data science, engineering, automation, but you still need to understand data, statistics, and modeling. Cool. So you later on you worked at ExxonMobil. Can you share kind of what is the typical day to day working in the energy sector
Mm.
as a data scientist?
Yeah, it's a good question because like yourself, a lot of data scientists work in tech, right? And in the FANG world, that's kind of maybe
Yeah.
their proper home. But what does a data scientist look like at a non-tech company? Because I'll tell you
Mm,
for sure, ExxonMobil is not a technology company. So it was really interesting. ExxonMobil is a giant company, one of the biggest companies in the world, and they definitely have tons of data that has a lot of really good potential and a lot of really good use cases. But not a lot of data scientists. I mean, there is a lot because it's a huge company. It has 70,000 people, but their data science program is still what I would consider pretty young. And with that, it's very interesting because you have this combination of a huge company with lots of infrastructure, but not a whole lot of like data pipelines. And so a big part of at ExxonMobil was trying to figure out how to get data in the right place. And I'm not very good at that, and I wasn't very good at that. So I was working with business stakeholders to try to get those pipelines built. To my knowledge, and I could be wrong, and I know you're going to gasp at this. Ready? I don't think we had a single data engineer on staff.
mhm.
So we just had like a bunch of information systems people trying to do the data engineering and data scientists trying to do the data engineering. But it was really hard to try to get data all together in the right place. So that was one of our biggest challenges. But on a day to day basis, I made a lot of models that would basically emulate or model what a chemical refinery would look like. So basically, so people could run simulations and optimizations to try to make the best gasoline, to try to make the most money while trying to minimize the impact on the environment. So I spent a lot of my time making models and trying to implement those models with people who make decisions. So it was a big collaboration and a lot of individual programming kind of all at the same time.
Thanks for sharing that. So I think it makes sense. A lot of companies, if they're in their early stage of data or data science journey, they don't really have data engineer. They might have some software engineer
Yeah.
to pull some logs together, and then data scientists who sometimes would do some data engineering work. So I think that's actually probably a very high impact project you built that helps later some data science project later. So can you tell us what type of optimization problem you're trying to solve? Like, what did you try to optimize?
Yeah, so it's actually really interesting because if you think about, like, for instance, let's take Amazon.
Mm,
Amazon, although you guys have like a crazy logistics system and delivery system and all that stuff, out of many products. But like, for instance, looking at your website, just like looking at the like app or website or whatever, experiments are pretty easy to do, right? Like you can A/B test stuff. You're not going to shut anything down. You can test stuff out pretty easily with just like turning on one line of code, whatever. But with chemical engineering, we're talking about a huge system that like is physical in the real world, and experimenting is hard. It's like you have to do stuff in the real world, like where it's not a digital product, right? And so what we would try to do is make basically mathematical models that resemble a whole refinery. So that way we could try to A B test using math and it wouldn't actually affect our process.
mm,
So most of the time we are making uh, models, most of the time linear, some mixed integer optimization problems too. But basically, we try to make a math model that represented the refinery and would say, okay, well, what would happen if oil dropped in half, for instance? What would our margins be? What crude oils would we be buying from around the world? What would our effect on the environment be, like our sulfur or our emissions? Are those below what the government regulations are? So
mm.
basically, we would just create a model where people could kind of play with it and try to decide what business decisions would be the smartest to make in different situations, which is really hard to do with a physical product because you just would be losing a lot of money, and you never know how things work in the real world when you're messing with them. So try to mess with them with a model first and make sure it works okay.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And when you talk about a model, how do you build a optimization model? Do you just try different type of scenario, and are there any specific algorithms you used?
That's another good question. It really just depends. Um, a lot of the times we were solving LPs or linear programs, which basically those are pretty well studied, and solving them is pretty easy. There's a lot of commercial solvers or open
Mm,
source solvers that you can use. So we did utilize a lot of LP solvers. But other times, for more of like the less of the day to day and more of like the research down the line, we did
yeah.
test out different type of optimization algorithms. Did a lot of research on like which ones might solve fastest, what might have constraint issues, feasibility issues. One of the projects that I did in R&D was looking at genetic algorithms. So like being able to look at how to optimize things with genetic algorithms, which was an interesting project. But most of the time we were solving LPs or something similar, and we could use open source or commercial software to actually do the solving. So I was focused less on the solving algorithms and more on the
Hmm.
modeling algorithms most of the time.
What do you mean what kind of modeling algorithm is it?
Oh, so we did different things, but I mean nothing crazy. Most of the time,
Hmm.
it's just like a matter of stringing together a bunch of like so we would if you look at a refinery, there's a bunch of different processes. There's tanks, there's what we call towers, which like separate chemicals. Then there's reactors, and that's the most
Mm,
interesting and more difficult ones, where you're basically taking in one thing, doing a chemical reaction to turn it into something else. So I spent most of my time trying to model the reactors. And we tried different things, but I mean, the stuff like I could talk about is like no different than like multivariate linear regression, for example, is one of the most
hmm.
basic things we'd do. So we'd take real data, a bunch of x's, things like the temperature of the reactor, things like the pressure of the reactor, what was coming in, like how much of this chemical was there versus this chemical, those types of things. And then we would try to predict, well, what chemicals, how much of product A are we going to make, and how much of product B are we going to make, and what are those compositions like? So we basically would make a bunch of models, a lot of the time, multivariate linear regression, but not always. But the cool thing or the interesting thing about it is for one reactor, you might be interested in 25, 30, maybe even 100 Y's, target variables. So we had to
Yeah.
make a lot of models. So we got really good at figuring out how to make models quickly.
Mm, yeah. Got it. So what are some challenges in building those multivariate linear models?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I think I think making sure, um, honestly, the hardest thing about those models, in my opinion, was implementing them into the pipeline. So I probably can't go into too much detail about what our pipeline looked like, but I'll just say it involved a lot of Excel, like a ton of
Mm,
Excel. So not a very like automated process to get that into like our optimization pipeline, and so it was really hard to get that into the pipeline. And also, the next hardest thing was probably like communicating about it and explaining, why these different models behave in certain ways, and getting user buy-in, I think was difficult. The actual training of the models, I think the hardest part was just doing it in an automated way. Because you
hmm.
can imagine if you have like 200 target variables, it takes a long time to build, 200 machine learning algorithms. So it's a bigger scale. That was also an issue. Is just the sheer amount of models we had to build was difficult.
Yeah. And so when you have a lot of models, how do you monitor the performance of
Yeah,
the model?
yeah, that's also really hard too. Um, yeah, it was a very long process. You have to we did a lot of research to try to understand how the model would react in different circumstances, right? Because
Hmm.
um, like for instance, this is later in my Exxon experience, but the principle still applies. Is COVID was crazy for us, as I'm sure it was probably for Amazon, but all of a sudden, and even before COVID, Russia and Saudi Arabia were having an oil price war, and so that was messing with the markets and how much a barrel of oil costs and what your margins were. And then all of a sudden, COVID hit, and no one was driving, which obviously ExxonMobil makes a lot of gas. So all of a sudden your product's not nearly as worth as much. So your margins drop. And anyways, your whole refinery is operating differently than you had
Yeah.
initially planned. So a big part of these models is just before it ever goes into production, testing it out in different, scenarios. Well, what if oil costs this much? Or, what if this whole reactor is down? Like, you just try to expose your model to as many things as possible, look at the results, talk to the people that understand the actual business case, which is in this case was, the reactor people, the chemists and stuff like that. And okay, does this
Yeah.
number make sense? Do any of these values seem like really off? But it's a really hard process. Verifying it was very difficult as well.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And previously, you mentioned you eventually learned how to build this model quickly. So, what was some methodology or process you adopt to build this model faster?
Yeah. So this was really cool. We built a pretty cool within our, like, because my group basically our and you probably know this, at a big company. When I worked for that smaller company at the beginning, I had to wear many hats. I did like
Yeah.
12 different job titles, right? But at a
Mhm.
big company at Exxon, I had one very, very specific job title. I was very niched. And so they would give me the data, I would make the model, and I'd ship the model off, right? And so within our little group, we came together and we basically came up with a way to almost automate our job where we'd get the data, plug it into like this Python script. It would fit all these models for us, generate all these graphs that would
Mhm.
like you said, verify and do all these scenario checkings and look at our parity plots, get our R squared values and stuff like that. But that was actually really a fun part of the process, was trying to take what we do on a day-to-day basis and actually automate it. So we utilized Python quite a bit for that automation, and from the machine learning building to the graphs. It was a really hard process, but that was also probably the funnest or one of the most fun things I did at Exxon was automating the job.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So, kind of predictive analysis combined with data engineering and some automation work. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And even like very basic UI. So we use, I never know how to say this. I always just say Tinketer, but some people like say Tkinter or something like that. But it's just like
Mhm.
the most basic GUI builder in Python. So we built this little GUI, and you could run it as an executable, and select your data. And press go, and it would just like run a bunch of things and pop up a bunch of reports, and based off of how those reports looked, you'd maybe go back to the drawing boards, tweak a couple variables, maybe you'd fit your models a little bit differently, or interaction terms, you'd add an interaction term or take out an interaction term. But yeah, it was definitely it was more than just building a model. In the end, there was definitely a lot of,
Mhm.
I don't think I'd be generous enough to say software engineering and all, but a lot of automation that was kind of held together by Python duct tape, but we loved it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you also worked on supply chain modeling
Yeah.
in ExxonMobil. What was the project like? That what type of model did you build?
Yeah, so that one's pretty interesting. There was a couple different ones. One of the ones that I worked on is it's a big. I mean, it's a problem that you can imagine that I'm sure Amazon has people working on this and probably solving it a lot better than I tried to solve it at Exxon. But Amazon and Exxon, we make products, right? And customers buy those products. Now, with supply chain, the whole idea behind supply chain is there's that basic selling ice cream in the park type problem where, I'm an ice cream vendor. I'm going to go to the park and sell ice cream. I need to decide how much ice cream to bring to the park. Maybe I'm selling ice cream sandwiches. Do I bring 10 ice cream sandwiches, or do I bring 100? So being able to predict demand, maybe if it's a hotter day, I bring more. And whether maybe it's the winter, I don't bring many at all. But if I bring too little, so for instance, let's say it's a hot day, I only bring 10 ice creams, right? I can sell out in 5 minutes, and there's opportunity lost where, I might have sold, 90 more ice creams that day, but because I wasn't, risking it, I didn't make that extra money. But maybe the next day I'm like, oh, I didn't sell. I sold too little yesterday. So today I'm going to bring 500 ice creams and I only sell 100. That means I lost the ice cream melts, right? And I lost 400 ice creams. So the problem is very similar at Exxon. It's how much gas do we send to all these gas stations around the nation? Because you maybe don't think about this very much, but we actually drive very cyclically. So the summer, we drive a lot. We're doing road trips. We're visiting our parents, whatever.
Yeah.
We're having fun. And also, like, for instance, in COVID, people weren't driving as much. So it's always changing how much we send to a gas station. So being able to forecast, how much gasoline should we send to, this ExxonMobil in Seattle, Washington that you'll go to tomorrow, right? Should we send a lot of gallons or not that many gallons? Trying to solve that problem. And once again, solving one of those problems isn't necessarily that hard, right? If we just focus on your gas station in Washington. But the problem is there's probably, 100 ExxonMobil gas stations in Seattle. And that's just one city, and so you multiply that by 50 states. All of a sudden, I can't remember the exact number, but we're talking making 1,000 different forecasts, which I'm sure is nothing for Amazon. But for Exxon, it was a lot. It was hard to deal with that much data and that many models to make sure they're all working properly.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So after you started working at ExxonMobil, I know you previously have a degree in, chemistry. So you understand some type of the process, but there's still a lot of domain knowledge you have to learn, right? So how did you learn that, how many gas stations you send gas, all those type of downstream process? How did you learn and collaborate with, I don't know, just say your business partners?
Yeah, it is interesting because, even though I studied chemical engineering in college, I like knew how the science and the math behind reactors, but I actually knew nothing about the business. I didn't know what it was like to sell gasoline. I didn't know what it was like to make gasoline. So I probably had to spend more time on the business domain rather than the chemistry domain. But it was still difficult, But I think one thing that where I had success at Exxon was when I got up out of my chair. If you get up out of your chair, you leave your desk and you go spend time in a different building. So for instance, I'm sure, Amazon has lots of floors, lots of different buildings, lots of offices. When I was at Exxon, I was in Spring, Texas, and we have, I don't know, maybe 10 buildings that are 6 stories each. So, 60 different floors. And I just work on one little section, right? And I found that I had a lot of more success and I understood the business a lot more when at least once a week I got up, I left my building and I went to another building. And I talked to someone there, whether it's like a friend I made from, just being a new hire at Exxon as well, just in a different part of the business, or maybe like a group or a club I belong to inside of the company. I think you learn a lot about the domain when you just shut up and you listen, you go somewhere else and just say, tell me what you do. I think you can learn a lot and there's a lot of value there.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So you also later on, I saw you wrote on LinkedIn post, you said you wasn't really happy with the work there. I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about like, what about it? We can talk about both. And what about the type of work that you enjoyed, and then what are the part that you find challenging? The type of challenge you don't quite enjoy.
Yeah, for sure. My time at Exxon, there was ups and there was downs. There's definitely pros and cons. And the day I left, I cried. I cried a ton. I was really sad to be leaving, but I also cried because I was happy to be leaving. So it was, and I actually have all this. This is kind of a side note, but I have all this content of me leaving Exxon. I've actually haven't really posted about it because I've kind of been too scared because I'm scared of Exxon a little bit. But
Yeah.
I've been gone long enough that no one even cares about me anymore, which is fine.
Yeah.
That's how I want it to be. But okay. Pros of working at Exxon. I loved the campus I worked on. Beautiful campus. I got lots of, not as probably as much free food at Amazon, but I got lots of free food until COVID happened. Then not as much. I had really brilliant coworkers, like really smart people to talk to. I loved 98% of the people I worked with at Exxon. That they were awesome, very
Mm-hmm.
smart, intelligent people. So I loved that. I loved, I guess, the environment. But I struggled working for a big company. Before Exxon, I actually interned with Exxon in between my junior and senior year. And then I went there and worked full time. So I'd only worked for VaporSense besides Exxon, which is that small company I talked about at the beginning, which was only 12 people when I started, right? So I went from a company with 12 people to 70,000 people. And I think I just really learned that I thrive in smaller environments. I like working in small teams. I like wearing multiple hats and trying different things. I get bored easily. I really think I do. And so I love doing a different task and I love learning. And I feel like at Exxon, I was kind of stuck in a little pigeonhole some of the times. And probably the most important thing that ended up being the deal breaker for me is I just wanted to build stuff. I wanted to make new things. I wanted to be creative. I wanted to try new things. And I was coming into a company with 70,000 people. That's, a 100-year-old company. They're very set in their ways. And they're less focused on, this is my experience. People might experience differently, but
Sure.
the group I was in was less interested on research and making and more about supporting and continuing. And I wasn't as interested.
What do you mean
that.
by supporting and continuing? What's kind of the difference?
So, for instance, I told you a little bit about our data pipeline.
Yeah.
Excel macros, millions of them. And I'm bad at Excel. I'm very bad at Excel, and Excel's very cluttered, and there's lots of room for mistakes, and it's not very automated. And so I would be like, oh, let's build this in like a real ETL Python pipeline. And they'd be like, okay, or we could just keep doing what we're doing. And specifically, there was a big problem at the company that I saw an opportunity to fix. And I didn't really tell my boss, but I was like, I'm going to fix this problem. And so kind of on my own on a side mission, I was sneaking around trying to solve this problem. And I ended up making a really great solution.
Okay.
And then I showed my boss and I was like, hey, look what I built. This was not my job at all, but it was so helpful to so many people. And they're like, oh, this is awesome. But they also kind of got mad at me. And so it was just kind of like that thing of where it was like, I didn't feel like I was free to see a business problem, give a solution that actually helped everyone. I didn't really feel empowered to do that. And so it just got to the point where, I loved my coworkers. I loved the environment. But I didn't love the culture. And it was kind of making me miserable. So I knew I had to make a change. And so I ended up leaving. And I also, never mind. This is a story for another day, but there's this underground, have you ever heard of the layoff.com?
No. I think recently this is a layoff.io or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. So it's this it's almost like Reddit for layoffs, and it's anonymous, and you basically just get on there and you complain about company culture and what management's doing wrong. Is
it layoffs? FYI?
It could be. There's also levels, I think, too. I don't know. There's probably a lot of them. But either way, this is like an underground anonymous place where you basically would complain. And when I left, for some reason, some feathers got ruffled. And there was this whole story that I got let go, and I was really mad, and I threw a temper tantrum and threw computers and all this stuff. Anyways, it's just kind of a funny story, but
no, we can share anything on the podcast.
Yeah, that's it. Anyways, I just left in January of 2021 and chose to move on.
Oh yeah, I was just Googling while you're talking. So there's a layoff.com. I think maybe that's the one you're talking about. And there's also layoffs.com. .fii.
Oh,
The
wow.
website that is a tech layoff tracker and startup
Oh,
layoff list. So it's more like a tracker. So
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, that's probably that might be popular the last week or the next week, it seems like, huh?
Yeah. I think might be started kind of this year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks for sharing that. And then
Yeah.
you mentioned you're preparing for some other LinkedIn posts and talk more about your story. Was that a story you were gonna tell, or can you give us a sneak peek of more?
No, I mean, yeah, that's I've been careful to talk about it just because
Yeah.
um I I'm such a small fish for Exxon. But I'm
Hmm.
just always so scared of them
Yeah.
still. They're just a big company. And
Hmm.
I left pretty amicably
Yeah.
with my boss, like with my group. I love all of them. I
Hmm.
still stay in contact with a lot of them.
Yeah.
But there was that whole thing where I created that product that I wasn't really supposed to do. That was kind of awkward. And then also it was a really awkward time in the company's history because, like I said, ExxonMobil is not a tech company, and it was also in Texas. And we got sent home in March, like the whole world did.
Yeah.
But they tried to bring us back in June of
Okay.
2020. Um, we went back. It was like 1 week on, 1 week off. We did that for about 2 weeks, and then COVID spiked on campus, and so they sent us
Hmm.
home again. And so there was just basically there was a weird tension between the company saying that you should come back to the office, um, but they couldn't make us in 2020. Right? It was kind of like
Hmm.
not safe. And so I didn't come into the office that much. I really loved working from home. So that was also kind of an awkward stage. And then lastly, I started a company right after leaving, which is something that a lot of people at Exxon don't do necessarily. A lot of them went to Amazon or EY or McKinsey or something like that. And I think a lot of people just didn't like that I did that. And um, it was just they just didn't like that I was choosing to be an entrepreneur. So
Mm.
like on the layoff,
But you started the company after you left
yeah,
ExxonMobil, right? Then
yeah,
what do you mean they don't like? Then they're not in touch with you or anything.
I know. And it was really just like one or two trolls that don't even really know me.
Mm.
Um, but anyways, they'd make up these stories on the layoff.com, like
Oh, about you.
about me. Like one of them was saying that I got sued because uh I started my company that was competing with Exxon, which I don't make gasoline at all. Like and that
Well,
like
data is the new oil. You heard
yeah,
that.
that's true. Maybe that's why. But they made this whole story that like I got sued. I flew back to Houston. I
Uh-huh.
broke into the campus, which like ExxonMobil's campus is so secure. You have to have
Right.
a badge everywhere. They have a guard. Anyways, I broke into campus. I busted into the offices. I threw a bunch of computers and like had this whole like fit. Like this is like a whole flow, like big story on the layoff.com. I'm sure like only like 25 people read it, but anyways, it was just like a really weird experience to have, because I really like I said, I still talk to most of the people I worked with at Exxon, and honestly, like half the people I worked with don't work at Exxon anymore either. So
Mm.
kind of a weird experience, and I'll eventually post like more about the story and um, just like my last day. I cried a ton my last day. Um,
Hmm.
Anyways, it was a crazy experience. And it was also
Yeah.
really emotional for me because I went from having a really secure, great salary to
Yeah.
nothing was given. And so that was really scary
Mm.
for me. And it was a really interesting timeline in my life.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So you said you cried on your last day. What made you feel so emotional about the leaving the company?
I don't, I grew up like just my dad. I love my parents. I love my dad a lot. And they were great
Hmm.
parents. But my dad always just like hammered into me, which is so funny because my dad's an entrepreneur. My dad hasn't
Yeah.
like, he's been an entrepreneur for like the last like 25 years, you know, but he always hammered into me, you like have to study hard and get a good job. And so in high school, I worked so hard to get good grades. I worked, to get a scholarship in college. And then once I was in college, I was always trying to have a good GPA so I could get a really good, high paying job after I graduated. And I had it. A lot of people would be so grateful for my job at Exxon. I
Mm-hmm.
honestly, I don't think I ever worked over 40 hours a week, ever.
Yeah.
And it had great benefits. I loved my coworkers. It was a very cush job. There was nothing
Mm-hmm.
wrong with it. And here I was just throwing it away, I felt like. Um,
Oh.
and I honestly felt really, this is going to sound so funny, but I really felt ungrateful.
Mm.
Because I felt like I wasn't appreciating what I had. And so it was just a really weird moment of like trying to be proud of myself for trying like following my heart and trying something new. But also just like appreciating what I had because I really did love working for Exxon. It was a great company. I really missed my coworkers. I still miss the biweekly check. That's always just like such a nice feeling to have. So it was just a lot of emotions of, unworthiness, like I not feeling good enough, also feeling like I was maybe
Mm.
making a mistake. It was just a lot of emotions. And I think I'm just kind of a baby and I cry easily. So I felt a lot. And so
Mm.
it just came out my eyes.
Yeah. No, I think it's good to, recognize those emotions and process those, right? And so what company did you start after that? Did you start the Data Career Jumpstart?
I actually didn't. So when I quit, I just, well, okay. I knew I had to leave Exxon. I knew I had to go
Hmm.
somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah.
This was also during COVID, keep in mind. So not everyone's hiring. So I applied for a couple jobs and honestly, I didn't get them. I didn't get a lot of jobs I wanted to get. Um, and I always knew I wanted to try being an entrepreneur. And so honestly, my wife was really encouraging me, you should try this. You should try becoming an entrepreneur. And so I really just started freelancing. I just
Hmm.
started freelancing and I knew I didn't want to do freelancing my whole life and like consulting, but I knew that it would give me a chance to try to figure out what I wanted to do. And so when I quit my job, I did a lot of freelancing. At that point, another thing we forgot to talk about, or I forgot to talk about, was ExxonMobil didn't like me posting on LinkedIn. That was another thing. They weren't really huge
Mm.
fans of that. But at that point,
Oh, so
yeah,
yeah. Well, when did you start to post on LinkedIn?
I started posting on LinkedIn uh, like somewhat consistently in when COVID happened. That was like my
Oh,
first
okay.
post. Um,
Yeah.
when COVID happened and we had no idea what it was, um, right? We were all freaking out. We were like, oh
Hmm.
my gosh, what is this? My wife worked in the hospital. So my wife actually was on the floor of the first COVID case in Texas. Um,
Oh, wow.
yeah. And so it was kind of freaking everyone out, right? And the government, I don't know if you actually saw this, but the government put out like
Hmm.
a call for data scientists and was like, hey, we don't know what this is. Here's like 400,000 medical documents that might relate to SARS and COVID and all this stuff. Like, tell us what you can do. And I was like all gun ho about it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna solve COVID. Um, I'm so bad at NLP though, so I didn't really help that much. But I made a post on LinkedIn and tagged what we would consider a bunch of LinkedIn content creators, like Ben Taylor, probably Kate Strachney, just like a bunch of people like that. And I said, hey, look, let's make a call to the data science community, and help fight COVID with data science. I thought that was
Yeah.
so cool. And that post went semi-viral. I mean, I don't remember the exact metrics, but for
Hmm.
at the time, it was like huge for me. It was like 70,000 views or something like that. I was like,
Yeah.
oh wow, you can post stuff on LinkedIn and people will look at it. I didn't even know that. So then I started posting. I wouldn't say daily then, probably, but I started posting a lot more um, around then, probably.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So that's how you started to share on LinkedIn. What do you usually post about?
Yeah, I usually just post data science tips. So,
Hmm.
and recently it's been a lot more like motivation, because
Mm.
when I was learning data science at VaporSense, I honestly probably didn't even know the term data science. I was just learning machine learning, is what and automation, right? And I just didn't know where to go. I only knew that one guy who was a data scientist. and he left. And we didn't even call him a data scientist. We called him a chemometrician, which is a very unique role in data science where it's like a very mathematical chemist.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I only know about chemometricians. Anyways, and it was just hard to learn. And so my goal is just trying to help people get a tip or a little motivation so they don't feel like they're as alone as I felt.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's usually what I post.
And that got you in trouble posting those?
Yeah, there was honestly, so there's two instances that come to mind. And if you're my boss and you're listening to this, I love you and you're awesome. But one of the times I had done in my master's program, I had built a stock predicting model using machine learning.
Yeah.
And I predicted like Amazon. It was a terrible model, but I predicted Amazon stock. I predicted Tesla stock. And I also predicted ExxonMobil stock. And didn't think anything of it. But that's when you work for a public company.
Oh,
you're not supposed to talk about what the stock price might be in the future.
Yeah.
Which is understandable, although it had nothing to do with me. Like, I didn't say the stock. I did like 20 other companies, and Exxon was just one of them, and it was completely data driven. It's not like I knew anything. So that one I understand a little bit. But I talk about data science. I talk about like how to do things in data science, and Exxon's a big company. And actually, my biggest chunk of my connections on LinkedIn are Exxon employees, because those are my coworkers. I connect with them. Their second connection, see my post, they connect with me. And so I had a big chunk of ExxonMobil employees in my network. And I'd post stuff about LinkedIn or about data science on my LinkedIn, and those people would see it. And so one day, a VP, a vice president, actually reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, will you come to my office and talk to me about data science at ExxonMobil?" And I said, "Sure, that's awesome." I'm just like, at this point, I am a data scientist at Exxon. That is my exact title, but just barely. And I told my boss, and I thought that they'd be excited about it. And they're like, "Well, you have to bring me to this meeting." And I said, "Okay, well, they asked me." And they said, "Well, you had to bring me." And I said, "Okay, let me ask." And so I messaged the VP and I said, "Hey, my boss wants to come. Is that cool?" And the VP said, "No, I just want to talk to you." And so I think that was a little bit awkward. Honestly, it was super awkward. And so that type of relationship where I was influencing without authority, right? Like, I was not a manager. I was not a tech lead. I was just a normal data scientist, but I was getting attention from people at the company. I think that there was just a lot of politics behind that people didn't like. So it was awkward.
Yeah. I get it.
I'm sure you do get it, because Amazon's a big company too.
Yeah, so I know you keep referring to, so I actually just left Amazon 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Oh, congrats.
Thanks. Yeah, I joined a startup, but I'm still in San Francisco. So in Amazon, I think other bigger companies, we have those requirements. You need to do some PR training on social media. And then as long as you don't talk about those type of, like you mentioned, kind of trade secrets or other things, and generally it's fine. But you do need to do certain type of training. I think maybe it's just like a tech thing. Again, maybe in ExxonMobil, I don't know what's the internal requirement. I think there's just differences in like culture. Yeah,
for sure. I think you're 100% right. I think it's the fact that they're not a tech company, and they just hadn't experienced this really that often. So I didn't go through any training, and I'm sure I said stuff maybe I shouldn't have said and stuff like that. Well, I apologize. I missed your announcement that you left. Congratulations. That's exciting.
Oh, no worries. Yeah.
Very cool.
So we talk about, I think you were going to talk about consulting. So,
yes.
Can you share like what are some like a challenging or interesting project you worked as a data science consultant?
Yeah. So I think, let's think, what's the most interesting one I've worked on? A lot of the time it's like basic report making and building a pipeline for basic reports and dashboards.
Yeah.
So I worked with a cybersecurity company, and they record a bunch of logs like you talked about earlier, and they're
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, what can you tell us about these logs? And so that was kind of an exciting project of just delving into you know dozens of companies cybersecurity data, and trying to tell them what might be interesting, what might be happening to them, and then creating a report for this company that they actually used in marketing. It was just like their way of showing what they can do for you and your company. And so being a part of making this report and packaging it together was a really fun project. That's the first big project I got after I left. So that I really
Yeah.
enjoyed doing that.
Yeah. So, what was it like to be a data science consultant? For example, do you put your resume, past project on some website like Upwork, and how did you set up that pipeline? How did you get your first client?
Yeah, I did use Upwork, which is a very interesting process. A lot of people have strong feelings. I'm actually a
Mm.
big fan. It worked really well for me, so I did use Upwork, and it was a great experience. But also, I didn't rely on it that much, because at this point I had built my LinkedIn to, I don't know, maybe 15,000 connections or followers, and I had been building my personal brand for a year and a half, right? And so I actually, once I said I left, I actually got a lot of opportunities just from LinkedIn. Um,
Yeah.
and I've honestly never done any like outbound sales. Like, I've never reached out
Hmm.
to people and pitched things. Um, I built my Upwork profile to where I was like one of the higher rated people on Upwork. And so people would request me, and then people would request me on LinkedIn. And those are the projects that I did.
Yeah. That sounds great. So
Yeah.
you already built a personal brand. You didn't even, I guess, when you start posting, you wasn't thinking about, oh, I'm
No.
building my brand to get freelance work. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm a huge fan of LinkedIn, because building a personal brand, I feel like, will very rarely hurt you in your life. It's
Hmm.
usually beneficial. And I didn't
Yeah.
ever envision doing this, but it's worked out so far. So
Yeah. That's awesome. Congrats.
thank you.
Also, when I started post on LinkedIn, I just feels like, who are the losers post on LinkedIn? It's so weird. Like, you know,
Me.
like, no, I was just talking about myself. Like,
Yeah.
when I first post, I just feels like it's just for job updates
Yeah.
and networking. Why would you ever post? I think I first posted because I got a lot of direct messages. Oh, how do you get into Amazon? How do you get into data science? And then I feel, oh, instead of answering everyone, one by one, why don't I just make a post?
Mm.
And then I start to like LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn get a lot of hate. I kind of get it. Like, a lot of
Yeah.
things on your feed, it's just those, what is it? People call it hustle porn,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of them don't seem authentic, but I like that because you do have your profile associated with your name, your company. I
Yep.
think people, or some people don't know, but I think most people know. So their comments are more thoughtful. You cannot hire behind a avatar and then just send toxic messages. And also, it's professional. Like, every time I post something related to data science and career, I have a lot of very productive discussions. So I think LinkedIn is kind of underrated. It's definitely not perfect. Like, no platform is perfect. It depends on what you want. So yeah, I just feels like kind of share the same experience with you. When I started posting, I wasn't thinking about what I'm gonna do with my personal brand. Am I gonna start a podcast? But somehow it happened. I don't think for everyone who's listening, it doesn't mean you have to post, every day or anything. You don't have to use LinkedIn. But if you have any thoughts about your work, learning, you can, doesn't have to be a social media. You can create your own blog. You can put something on Medium. Maybe just once a year. The reason I post on Medium is for me to summarize things I have learned in my previous project in
Yeah.
case I forgot.
Yeah.
And then people would find me. I think that if you're looking for a job that helps with some discovery and help you build your credibility. So yeah, that's just a little bit of my 2 cents about social media and LinkedIn. So it seems like it's a great way for you to get customers, and they know you're not just a profile behind Upwork. You have personality, you have opinions, right? So people trust you more when they know you are the person who is going to develop the dashboard or analytics for them.
Yeah, exactly. And you're just at the top of their mind. So like
Hmm.
let's say, someone runs a company and they don't know it yet, but eventually they're going to need someone to create an algorithm for them, right? They've seen the last year, let's say they see I post every day. Let's say that they see 1/7 of them. So they see one of my posts a week. That means in the last year, they've seen my name 50 times. And so when they are like, oh crap, we need to make an algorithm, who's their first call? The person they've seen every single week for the last year. So it's
Yeah.
just great to be top of mind.
Yeah, free marketing for you.
Yeah, exactly.
And are you still doing any of those consulting work today?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, today I spent a lot of my time doing consulting work. So right now I have a smart construction client, and I actually have a manufacturing software client that
Mm,
I'm spending some time working with.
nice. And for the data scientist thinking about becoming a data science freelancer, what's your best advice for them?
I think you have to get started if you want to do it.
Mm,
That's the hardest thing. Once you get the ball rolling, it's way easier, but getting started is really hard. I think Upwork's great because that's the place where you make matches between companies and freelancers. And then this is really controversial. People either hate this advice or love this advice.
yeah.
But I'm a big believer in proving your value. And so, for instance, the first job I ever had, it was part time during college. I worked for free for like 5 hours a week, maybe 10 hours a week.
Wow. Mm,
Yeah, it was. They told me that they'd pay me after 3 months, right? Um, and it's it sucked, right? It sucks to work for free. Some people, I was
yeah.
lucky that I was able to, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it really blessed me because everything in my life I can trace back to actually that experience. And so my first freelancing job, I probably made below minimum wage. I probably made $5 an hour on
Mm-hmm.
it. But it was my first. I understood, like, I needed someone to take a chance on me. They took a chance on me because I was cheap, right? I delivered an awesome project, wrote me a great review, and all of a sudden, the next time when I apply, I double my rate, right? And you just keep doubling your rate until you're at a place where you want to be. But it's all about getting experiences underneath your belt, and that first one's hard. So sometimes you have to get paid a little bit less than you'd like to. Um, that was my experience, anyways. And some people will hate that advice, but that worked for me. So that's what I'll share.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And so right now, do you work do everything by yourself, or you have people who work for you?
I've hired contractors. I don't have any full time employees, but I've hired contractors. Or hiring people is really hard, but doing everything by yourself is also really hard. So a lot of the data engineering parts that I'm not as good at, I have a guy that I typically use. But yeah, I do contract some stuff out. But I wish I was better. I'm not a very good manager. Anyone watching this ever thinking of hiring me as a manager? I'm a bad manager. Um, so I need to get better at it. I would like to hire more people, but it's not one of
Hmm.
my strengths.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So sounds like you start to scale your business, then that's why you start to hire people to help you.
Yep,
I think that's a good thing. It takes time to learn all those management
it
skills, but
does.
I think you'll get there. So you previously talked about you built some personal project like predicting stocks. Are there other personal projects you built?
Oh yeah, that's my favorite part about data science. Honestly, if I can figure out a way that someone's just going to pay me to make interesting random projects, that's what I would do.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, like, do you remember Tiger King on Netflix? Did you ever watch that?
I didn't watch that, but I know
Okay.
the show.
I like one time did a deep dive into Joe Exotic, the Tiger King's tweets. That was really fun. Like just exploring what he would talk about. That was really fun. I've done a project on my screen time on my phone, so making like a dashboard of like how much time I'm spending on TikTok or Instagram or LinkedIn and stuff like that. That was really fun. I've done one on basketball. I love basketball. So I've analyzed my favorite professional basketball team, the Utah Jazz, and like what the best shot for them on the court was. I love
Hmm.
personal projects. I think they're so fun.
Yeah. So now you also coach people to do data science. What made you want to start that?
Um, Once again, I think it really stems back from how I learned, right? So I guess I learned kind of twofold. So I originally learned how to be a data scientist while I was working at VaporSense. I was on the job. I was making machine
Hmm.
learning models. They're going into production. I had no idea what I was doing. I learned everything I knew from one undergraduate statistics class, one
Hmm.
undergraduate data science class, which was cool that my school, it was brand new. I think it was the second semester they had taught it. I had taken like calculus and uh, I guess math classes, right? But basically, the statistics class and the data science class were my only formal training. Then everything else was on YouTube or towards data science. I
Yeah.
just would watch and read as my or books from the library. I checked out a lot of like statistics books from the library and just would read through those. And it was just, and I was all by myself. I didn't even know the term data scientist. Like I said, I was like, I do machine learning or I'm a chemometrician. So I was just so by myself and it was kind of miserable. And then got my job at Exxon, became a data scientist at Exxon. But I chose I wanted to be seen as an expert and like, you know, I don't know, never be doubted my skills. So I got a master's degree in analytics from Georgia Tech. And
Hmm.
that degree, I actually have a YouTube video about my review. It was good. It was a good degree, but there's also parts I didn't love.
Yeah.
And so I was just thinking, I want to make a cheaper, affordable way for people to learn data science that's a little bit more fun. And so that's where Data Career Jumpstart, my boot camp, was born. And it's all about projects. Like I said, I love projects. And so inside the boot camp, instead of like doing exercises or like watching a video and just like learning the theory, I'm really big hands on. So the first thing we do is build a project in Data Career Jumpstart. We build the screen time dashboard. And then the next module, we're going to learn pandas. And so we learn pandas by analyzing our fitness data from our phones, how many calories and how many steps we burn. So I'm just really passionate. I love to learn with projects. And so that's why I decided to build Data Career Jumpstart. It's just like, can we just learn? It's a little bit more fun.
Yeah. So what are the kind of missing elements in your grad school program, and what are you doing right now to kind of fit that missing puzzle?
I thought so. Yeah, I think the technical stuff, at for instance, at my degree, was pretty good. Like I don't think it was bad at all. But for me, when you're breaking into data science for the first time, one of the biggest weapons you have in your arsenal is your portfolio. And a portfolio is really just, I help teach at MIT right now as well. There's like one video on how to make a portfolio and it's terrible. Like people just think the portfolio is an afterthought. You have to learn, you know, ANOVA or you have to learn neural nets. But like, oh yeah, there's also portfolio you can make if you want. But for me, it's like the opposite. It's like if you want to, you're learning data science to get a new job. If you want a new job, you have to prove your worth. The portfolio is the best way to prove your worth. So that's really my focus is helping them create portfolios from the start. It's not like an afterthought. The whole curriculum just like designed around the portfolio. So that's one thing that's missing. And then the second thing that's missing is going back to what we're talking about earlier. And this isn't as big, but it can be like a huge leverage multiplier. And that is building your personal brand while learning. So one of my students who joined has been posting on LinkedIn every once in a while, and he's grown from like 200 connections on LinkedIn to like 5,000, you know?
Yeah.
And he got a new job. It gave him a $20,000 raise. And it's like your life can really be blessed by having a personal brand and by having a portfolio. And so I really try to focus the curriculum around that versus the
Hmm.
technical. I'm not the best technical teacher on planet Earth. I'm just not. Like, I still have to look up like what are the assumptions before multivariate linear regression. Like, I don't have that memorized, but like I really try to focus on how do I help you get a job as fast as you can, you know?
Yeah. Can you share some other like success stories? Like, for example, how does a portfolio helps a candidate? Because I would assume they still have to pass the technical interview, right? Is the portfolio more helpful in the beginning to attract the recruiter, or in a later decision part, they feel this candidate kind of stand out because of the portfolio?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, the gatekeepers are like recruiters and the hiring managers, right? And there's nothing worse than applying to 20 jobs online and hearing back from 0 of them, just getting ghosted. That's the worst. And so it's always best when you can talk to a human. Like for instance, talking to you right now is so much more fun than messaging, right? It's like we're having a great time. It's always so much just better to be able to talk to a human being. And so what the portfolio allows you to do is actually get to a human being faster, which just increases your odds like 5x because like it's just you can make an impression. So it's really good for getting to the gatekeepers, but also, you know, these smaller companies. So for instance, one of the cool things now is people reach out to me and they say, "Hey, I want to hire a data analyst. Do you have any suggestions?" Which is one of my favorite things to do because it's just like you just get to help everyone, and I love that. I love. So, anyways, a car, like a car, I don't know, like a car lot, like a Ford. I don't remember the exact company, but like not a local. It was in North Carolina. Like a car company, not a car company, a, a Ford car store was looking to hire their first data analyst, and they have no idea what to look for. So I help them like write the description and stuff, but they're not going to do a SQL test necessarily. You know, Amazon, obviously you have to pass a lot of technical, you know, all of the FANG companies, you have to pass technical exams, but that's not always true of data analyst roles. A lot of data scientist roles is true, but a lot of people just want data analyst roles. So for instance, one of my students, my mom's a teacher. She teaches third grade. And teachers are the saints of the world. In America, we do not pay them nearly enough, and they have to deal with so much crap, especially with COVID. It's been really crazy for them. Remote teaching and masks and a bunch of stuff. That's just been really hard. And so I actually I have a bunch of teachers in my program that are trying to get out of teaching. They don't want to make $40,000 a year and be stuck, you know, commuting and stuff. And so one of my students joined the program and got a data analyst job, a remote data analyst job, like after 2 months of being in the program. And she's stoked because all of a sudden she doesn't have to commute. She's not in teaching. The pay grade in teaching is so slow. You do not make that much, like you don't make an increase every year, you know. So now
Mm-hmm.
she has a bigger potential. And her whole thing was she had a portfolio because she has zero data experience, zero technical experience. She's been a teacher and I think an insurance agent. That's it. And so the portfolio was really key to show, hey, look, you say you need SQL? Look at this problem I solved with SQL. Oh, you want Tableau? Look at this dashboard I made in Tableau. It's just like a great way to show evidence and show experience when you really don't have any.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And for people who trying to build a portfolio, what are some other best advice you have for them? Like how do you pick project, recommendation for, format, platform?
The best data science project you can build is the one you'll finish. Um, and I mean that with all sincerity because so many people start, but not a lot of people finish. And I think a lot of people don't finish because they get stuck technically, but maybe even more, they just lose motivation because you can Google anything and you can solve the problem. I really believe that. Like there's so much help on the internet, but I think people just get really stuck because they lose motivation. And so, in choosing a project, I suggest to people to choose one out of two things: a hobby you're just like in love with. So, for instance, for me, that was basketball. I just love basketball so much. Like, I would eat, drink, I would breathe basketball if I could, right? And that's just so interesting to me that when I hit a roadblock, I'm not going to be discouraged because I think it's so fun and I want to know the answer. Or two, choosing a job you want and try to emulate what they do. So for instance, if you really wanted to work for Airbnb, right? That's a really cool company, pays really well. Try to solve a problem that Airbnb is experiencing, or try to use like real life Airbnb data. So that way, when you hit a roadblock and you're stumped, you're going to be like, okay, I really want to like remote work for Airbnb with that high salary and like work on this cool short-term rental problem. And that'll keep you going. So that's my biggest advice is the project you want to do is the one you're going to finish. And you're only going to be motivated if you A, love the subject, or B, you're like so stoked on the job that you're trying to get from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great advice. Thanks for sharing that. So I think a lot of work you do, especially when you work with clients, um, when they don't even have a pipeline, don't even have a BI kind of reports.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you translate the business problem to a data problem and then help them to drive insights? So what was the whole kind of your pipeline look like?
It's so hard, Deliana. It's so hard. I'll share this quick little story. I had someone reach out to me on LinkedIn, and they wanted to build a. They said they needed an algorithm that would be able to count a certain physical movement. Okay, they're developing an app, and they wanted the algorithm developed. And they said, can you help me? I said, sure, and they explained like what the algorithm's supposed to do, what the purpose is. I said, okay, I understand this. Send me over some data, and we'll get this algorithm developed. They sent me over a like 10-line CSV and it was like one run. It wasn't like 10 runs, like 10
Yeah.
samples. It was one sample. And I was like, oh, can you send me the rest of the data? And they're like, this is all the data I have. And so I was like, crap. I should have been better at the beginning of explaining to build an algorithm. And really they meant a machine learning model. Like we have to have a lot of data. We have to have like different
Yeah.
examples and stuff. So that's a big part of my job is educating these CEOs, these managers, about what does it actually take to build a data product, and it's really hard. It's one of the hardest parts about consulting and something I'm still getting better at. um, it's really hard. And then the other aspect is even if they do understand, like, okay, I understand building up that pipeline, a lot of the times they don't have the right people. And a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
times I'm not even the right person. I'm a
Yeah.
chemical engineer with a master's in data science. I am not the
Mm-hmm.
world's best programmer. I'm not the world's best data engineer. I haven't had, all that much experience to it. So it's really hard. And it's a matter of trying to educate myself and then educate them. Or most of the time, what I end up doing is bringing in some trusted friends to contract for me and take that off of my boat. Because building the ETL, if you're a data engineer right now and you're thinking about doing like freelancing or consulting, you can make a lot of really good money building ETLs for small to mid-sized companies that aren't ready to hire a data engineering team but need some dashboarding information now. It's a cool place to be in.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So, when you kind of start work with the customer, usually how do you scope the problem? How do you know, whether you can solve the problem? So one thing you mentioned, right? Like, do they have enough data if
Yeah.
you want to do a machine learning problem? What are some other questions that you usually ask?
Yeah. So this is so good. So first off, you have to understand what business problem they're trying to solve. Because a lot of the times
Mm-hmm.
people will ask you for a solution, but really they should just be giving you the problem and you can suggest a solution. Because a lot of the times the solution that they're suggesting and the problem they're experiencing is not actually the same, which is really difficult. Very hard to do. Other good scoping techniques is just thinking about like time commitment, deadlines, like, okay, like when do you want this done by? Like, what's your expectations there? In terms of like scoping time, because like they'll ask for estimates a lot of the time. I like usually take my estimate and I usually double it because it's so hard to anticipate bugs and just all this stuff that might happen. So you got to think through that a little bit. Another thing is like thinking from the final solution and working backwards is really, really important. So like, what do you expect this to look like in the end? Because that'll
Mm.
totally change the way you work. Some of them might just want a Google Sheet, something that's not really deployed, that they can just type in a number and it'll give them a prediction. Some of them might want a website. It's just you spend a lot of time on the phone with them, like maybe like 3 hours on the phone with them, talking it through. And what can be really frustrating is like that's 3 hours of your time that could be gone because you could say, you know what, I'm not the best fit for you, or or they could say that to you as well, right? So it's really difficult. Something that I've seen other consulting companies do that I don't really like consulting that much and freelancing that much. I'm trying to do less of it. So if I was trying to do more, and if you want to do more, something I think is really good is doing something called like selling a data audit service. And basically,
Mm.
you sell a service of like coming in, talking to them about what they're experiencing, and like giving some recommendations. So that way, you actually get paid for that scoping session because it can be 3 hours on the phone and then maybe 2 hours by yourself. So you could be out 5 hours of time, which if you're charging $100 an hour, it's, $500. You're just out the window. So, or you could be charging. You could say, all right, I'm going to do a data audit for $1,000, and then you're making money there. So I'm still not that good at it, but those are some tips I've picked up over the last year and a half.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Um, and what are some other challenges with data science consulting besides the beginning part? For example, in the end, how do you make sure the customers are happy? Um,
Yeah. Pricing is one of the hardest things I've ever done.
mm,
Because a lot of the times people have a budget. And so they don't really care about your hourly rate. They say,
yeah,
how much is it going to cost to solve this problem? And you could say $2,000. But in your head, you're thinking, okay, if I charge $100 an hour, that's like whatever, 20 hours or whatever it is, right? But it can be, instead of taking 20 hours, it could take 40. And then all of a sudden you're making $50 an hour instead of 100. So it's so hard to do the pricing. I think that's such a good skill. I'm still really developing it. And like I said, I usually will come up with a number and then I'll try doubling it just because, and I'm never wrong. It's not like I'm ever like, it's always the higher number that ends up working out. So that's really
yeah,
hard. And then I would say the first mile and the last mile are difficult. So getting data from them, connecting to their databases, whatever that may be, that's always a challenge. And then delivering it, like deploying it, automating it, that's always a challenge as well. So the analysis in the middle, once you have the data, is usually pretty
yeah.
good, but the end and the
Hmm.
beginning's hard.
Yeah. So we usually previously I talked to my coworkers like once you have your data ready, it's like your project is almost done.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. This last, I'm working with a contractor or a consulting job right now where I'm helping them build a Power BI dashboard.
Hmm.
And my brother wants to get into data science. And so I thought this is perfect. I'm gonna contract this out to my brother. It's gonna help him learn Power BI, give him some experience under his belt. It'll be like a brother bonding experience. And so
Yeah.
I talked to him. He's like, "Oh yeah, I'm in. I'm gonna do it." But it's been so hard because this is probably like this is like 3 weeks ago. But like right now, I can't even get them to get the data like in the right shape that it's going to work. Like I keep having them make changes to their data warehouse so it'll just like actually work. And that's something I can't contract my brother. He just doesn't have any experience in it. And it's been like he's so mad at me because he's like, I thought you were gonna have me do this, and I'm like, I am, but the data just is too complicated right now, and just wait till it's shaped good, and then I'm gonna give it to him, and it's gonna take him like, I don't know, an hour, and then he's gonna be done. So yeah, it's so funny. The actual analysis part is usually so small compared to the rest.
Yeah. And for the last mile problem you talked about, what are your strategies to solve it?
Once again, I am a chemical engineer turned data scientist. So I don't have good I don't have the best computer science skills. I don't have the best cloud skills. So honest, I do most of my stack's mostly Python, back
Hmm.
end and front end. So I deliver a lot of Python front end projects that are hosted via cloud solutions, whether it's Google Cloud, AWS. So I utilize a technology called Dash from Plotly quite a bit. It's one of my favorites. Streamlit is another good one. But yeah, deploying to Google Cloud is the one I typically use the most because I'm just most familiar with it. Ends
Yeah.
up being my good friend a lot of the time.
Yeah. And now you're helping them teach a course in MIT and also doing data engineering work for MIT. Can you share some work you do there?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm actually although my LinkedIn says I'm a data engineer at MIT, I actually
Mm,
just help teach data engineering at MIT. There's an interesting for anyone listening who's trying to find a job on LinkedIn. I did an experiment where I changed my um, titles on LinkedIn to see how my LinkedIn, specifically recruiters, would reach out to me. And it plays such a big role. So earlier,
yeah.
it had my actual title there, which is like learning facilitator teacher or something like that, which is like some dumb role that like no one have ever heard of. But I changed to data engineer, and all of a sudden recruiters were coming to me with these data engineering roles. So, anyways, that plays a big role. So I don't actually do any data engineering for MIT, but I help teach the data engineering certificate. I'm like a glorified TA. So basically, the certificate has two professors that have made a bunch of videos and they teach the videos. But I host weekly office hours. I do the grading, and I do like one-on-one coaching and support. And it's a lot of fun. Like I said, I'm not that good at data engineering, so it's been an awesome experience for me to get better at it.
Hmm.
And it's like I said, there's data engineering so hot right now, and so I'm always really excited for these students, and I'm excited for me as well to just get better at these technologies and learn more about them and be able to use them to build better pipelines because that's the biggest gap I see as a consultant is these ETL pipelines. Just not enough people to build them, too many opportunities.
So now you help MIT teach this data engineering certificate. I don't think this type of training was available 5 or 10 years ago. So comparing to just writing SQL or writing Spark, what are some other data engineering core skills you're teaching in this course?
Well, I think you nailed it with the SQL aspect. So we do a lot of SQL. We also do a lot of Python. Um, we do a lot of Docker. We build a lot of Docker containers, which
Mm,
is
interesting.
yeah, which is something I hadn't done a whole lot of. So that's a good skill for me to learn. We do cover Spark, and then we get into we do like APIs, which is a good thing to learn. And then we get really more into the data engineering technologies. So we get to CDC, which is change detection capture, right? We get into things like Hadoop, so like distributed, computing and memory. We get into Airflow, so doing like what are they called, DAGs in Airflow. Um, what else? We get to Kafka. We do some, yeah, like real time analytics or streaming analytics. So yeah, it's basically a good foundation in SQL and Python, and then spending a week on each one of those topics, and then that's pretty much the training. It's good. I'm learning a lot for sure, and teaching a lot, which is awesome too.
Yeah.
And the students are doing really well.
Yeah, that sounds pretty intense. Each week covering one big topic.
It is. I don't think I would necessarily design it that way, but that's the way it's designed. And I think the students are probably exposed to a broad subset of topics
Hmm.
and not as much depth. But look at the depth, on the job. It's definitely a lot, and I definitely am not a huge expert in any of the more specific data engineering ones. It's something I'm learning as I go. I'm really learning a lot from these professors.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So you have a very interesting career journey from
Yeah.
in the beginning getting into data science, and now you're helping other people teach.
Yep.
So now looking back, what are some mistakes you think you made in your career?
Oh, the first one I is just learning by myself at the
Mm,
beginning. It's so much more fun to learn together. I just did not know where to go. I did not know the resources. Using, following people like you on LinkedIn is such a big add to people's lives, I think. So I think that's one of the first big things, mistakes I made. Other mistakes I've made. Okay, this is kind of interesting. Um, I hardly have ever used SQL on the job. Hardly. Like I've very rarely written SQL code. So I'm not the best at SQL, and I'm always getting better, with SQL. So I wish I would have probably learned SQL a little bit more and a little bit better and a little bit earlier, because I'm still improving with SQL every day. So that's probably the first two that comes to mind is learning in a structured environment with people, and then also just getting better at SQL earlier. I was a little late to the SQL game.
yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And what are some other lessons that you learned through your journey?
Oh, one of my favorite lessons is the internet is underrated. I love the internet, and people still don't understand all the opportunities it can open up. So, my master's was online. So, that's just awesome. That's just amazing that I did my master's online. LinkedIn has brought so much happiness and opportunity into my life. So that's been great. I've loved to just like the more time and the more value you can provide people on the internet, I think the better. Even if you're just getting started, people are like, "Oh, I don't want to post on LinkedIn. I'm just learning." That's like the coolest time to post. People love to see the journey. There's always someone that's a half step behind you. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? That can
Hmm.
benefit from it. So just sharing your stories on LinkedIn, I think is really big. Any other lesson that I learned? I think another thing is taking risks. That's a big thing in my life. Um, it was a risk to ignore my undergraduate degree pretty much completely. It was a risk to leave my job and become an entrepreneur. And I think risks. I've had some risks pay off, and I had others not pay off. But one of the ways I try to live my life is in 5 years, what am I going to be glad I tried, or or just thinking about um, one day you're going to be on your deathbed. That's kind of morbid, but like, what are you going to wish that you did? And I try not to have too many regrets. I much rather regret something I did than I didn't do.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I think regrets is really, someone made the analogy, regret is like your achievement divided by your regrets. And then if your regrets, you really want to minimize that because um I forgot what was the analogy. Basically, if your regrets, if you have a lot of regrets, it really kind of divided your achievements, and then in the end you're not going to feel so great. I think everybody's going to have a little bit of regret, and that's okay. I think the most important thing to is to learn a lesson from it.
For
And
sure, it's so
yeah.
important.
Hmm. And do you have any mentors or people who inspire you?
Mm, for sure. One of the people that inspired me most early on was Ben Taylor. He's on LinkedIn, works for Data Robot. Ben Taylor inspired me because we're both from Utah, and he's a chemical engineer, and
Oh,
he's a
really?
big deal, yeah, in data science.
Did you connect with him one on one?
Yeah, I met when I was an undergrad before any of my success as a data scientist at all. He did like respond to a couple of my messages, and
Oh,
that just meant
nice.
the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was awesome, and I've told him that we've talked since.
Hmm.
Um, we had dinner maybe like 2 months ago, which is cool now. But yeah, like he was just such an example. Like you can go from chemical engineering to data science. So I think he's probably one of them. Another one is Kate Strachney. She's just like so nice, and she's also an entrepreneur, and so it's just been good to talk and learn from her. So she's
Hmm.
probably another person. And then at every job, I've always had people that have known more than me, and I've learned from quite a bit. There's
Hmm.
a lot of people at Exxon that I really respect and learned a lot from. So
Yeah. What is
yeah,
the best lesson or kind of advice you learned from your mentors?
I think most of the time with mentors, the way I've personally used them
Hmm.
is they're just maybe like, I don't know. I don't even know the definition of mentor. But recently I heard like the definition of like a coach is to like just ask you a bunch of questions.
Yeah, help
And I
you
feel like,
reflect.
yeah, exactly. I feel like most of the time I end up giving myself advice, but it's not advice I would have given myself. It's advice that my mentors teased out of me. So I'll come to them with a problem, and then they'll ask me a question and let me talk, and then ask me another question, and eventually lead me to this like, correct answer. So I don't know if there's one piece of advice um, that they've given me. It's just more like our sessions together. They like help me eventually get to the like place where I should be. And I'd like to add one more thing when it comes to mentors is I learn a lot from books. Um, I'd almost consider people like books that I religiously study. And some of these people like they love their books and they like keep them very clean and pristine. I'm the exact opposite. I spill on my books. I write novels in my books. I never read without a pen.
Yeah.
And I really feel like I've actually learned a lot from people, from mentors. They'd have no idea that I see them as mentors, but these
Mhm.
authors that like I read their book like it's the Bible type of thing.
Yeah. And when you write maybe you highlight something, you're actively reading the
Oh
book,
yeah.
not just, passively. Sometimes I feel like, yeah, my eyes are moving, but my mind is thinking about something else.
Yeah, for sure. It's like active reading.
Yeah.
Um, and then I yeah, for some reason reading with a pen is like way better for me than just reading. It's awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. What's your favorite book to read?
I love like self-development, self-help
Hmm.
business books.
Yeah.
I actually just took like I have my bookcase over here. Last night I was like trying to find the answer to something about running a business. And so
Mm.
I took all my favorite books and they're by my bed. But another podcast, How I Built This by Guy Raz,
Hmm.
is one of my favorite podcasts. And he actually has a book that summarizes everything he learned from, interviewing, I don't know, hundreds of the world's most successful entrepreneurs. And I read that book when I was thinking about quitting, and it had a profound experience. Like it really influenced my life.
Mm.
So that's probably one of my favorite books that I read quite a bit.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Maybe I can also write a book about the lessons I learned from interviewing other
You
data
should.
scientists.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I think, yeah, it's obviously the podcasts are awesome and, you listen to them. But sometimes, pulling out like one lesson from each and packaging three of those lessons together into a chapter,
Hmm.
it flows in a different way than just listening to me flabber over for an hour type of thing.
I think you told us some great stories and have great advice. So now, at this point, where do you see yourself grow? What's next?
Oh man, that's a good question. I think, and I'm not like belittling mental health, but like I I think I have like ADHD or ADD. I'm not exactly sure, but I have a hard time. My attention span is just so short. I have a hard time staying focused, which is kind of bad. But I just like so many different things. I like so many different things. So, I started off consulting, and then I started doing courses, and then I started teaching for MIT, and then now I'm also doing all the courses, and I'm like, oh, I want to make a SaaS software, right? I want to build up my YouTube. I'm really trying to build a YouTube. I ran a podcast for about a year. I'm going to make some episodes too. I've been a little inactive recently, but I have a hard time focusing. So I
Hmm.
have no idea what's next for me in my life.
Yeah.
I have no idea. But the cool thing is, I know it'll involve data one way or
Hmm.
another. And I know I'm gonna like it. I'm excited for it. So I don't know. It could go in a million different directions, and my plans could change tomorrow. I really have no idea.
Yeah.
Um, One thing I'm really excited for. When's this episode supposed to come out? By the way.
Probably in 2-3 weeks.
Okay. Okay. So I'll say this. Okay. I'm gonna say this. In August, I can only plan like 1 month ahead. It feels like. So in
Hmm.
August, I'm going to go really hard with making cool data science projects on YouTube. So that's the future I see
Yeah.
is August. But the
Hmm.
rest of it, I don't know. I love what I do right now. And hopefully I'll just keep doing stuff like this.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. I think you have to try different things and then figure out what you like. And I definitely tried a bunch of things. I think maybe I also created one or two short videos on Instagram, just realized
Yeah.
not my thing. Maybe, you'll come back later. But I think it's definitely okay to do like a, random walk of different things and then
Yeah.
figure out what you really like. And then it's good that you already know what you like, right? You want to be in data.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely excited to see what holds for you in the future, and want to check out your YouTube video as well. So uh, before we wrap up, for folks who want to follow you online, where can they find you?
I'm on like LinkedIn the most. That's where I spend most of my time. So you can find me, Avery Smith, on LinkedIn. I've also dabbled in the Instagram, so Data Career Jumpstart on Instagram. I
Hmm.
also dabbled in TikTok. Have you
Nice.
tried TikTok before?
I maybe just look at a few accounts, but then I don't. I deleted it.
I also deleted TikTok. I don't have TikTok on my phone right now
Yeah,
because
but you
it's I
create
get
TikTok.
oh I'm so addicted. It's an amazing app.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've made some TikToks. I'm on TikTok. I think
Hmm.
very data, but hopefully LinkedIn's number one place. But hopefully I'm going to be growing my YouTube. So just Avery Smith data on YouTube should probably pull me up, and I'm really excited to be building more videos on YouTube over the next few months. I've become really obsessed with it as a platform. I deleted
Hmm.
TikTok, and I guess, and I spend all my time on YouTube now. So I
Yeah.
don't know. It's still on my phone, but I am learning so much on YouTube and so entertained. So trying to make more content there.
Yeah, that's exciting. Thank you so much for coming to the Data Scientist Show. It was a really fun conversation and learn more about you, your journey, and your stories.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I love what you're doing. I love what you do for the data community. I really appreciate you having me on, and we'll have to do another collab someday soon.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, thank you.